Welcome to Sleepy History with Carrie. Tonight we begin the story of an extraordinary and curious chapter in human history, where a rare royal obsession transformed the quiet decay of the court into the ultimate symbol of wealth and privilege. In the heart of the 16th century, the English court became deeply captivated by a crystalline white substance brought across vast oceans from faraway lands. Under the rule of Queen Elizabeth I, this costly luxury known as refined sugar grew to dominate every royal feast, altering not only the culinary traditions of the elite, but also their very appearance. As the sovereign's intense craving for sweetness took its inevitable toll, a remarkable paradox occurred, turning blackened teeth into the most desired fashion statement of London high society. Before we step into the grand halls of the Tudor court, take a deep breath and allow yourself to settle completely. Adjust your pillow until your neck finds its perfect resting place, and pull your blanket a little closer to shield you from the cool air of the evening. Let go of the thoughts that occupied your mind today, because right now your only task is to listen and to drift into a state of deep, undisturbed comfort. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears and feel the gentle weight of your body pressing into the mattress as we leave the modern world far behind. Imagine the year is 1575 and we are standing within the thick stone walls of Whitehall Palace in London. The air outside is damp and heavy with the scent of river mist and evening rain. But inside, the long corridors are illuminated by the warm, flickering glow of beeswax candles. You can hear the distant, soothing crackle of a grand fireplace, and the faint rustle of heavy wool and velvet robes brushing against the polished wooden floorboards. The atmosphere is thick with the scent of aged oak wood smoke, dry lavender strewn across the floor, and the faint rich aroma of spices drifting from the lower kitchens. As you close your eyes and listen to the soft, steady rhythm of the narrative, remember that this is an ambient historical narrative curated exclusively for relaxation, sleep assistance, and educational entertainment. Derived from authentic primary records and antique chronicles, the prose has been softly adapted to foster a soothing, restful atmosphere where your thoughts can gently fade into a peaceful slumber. Every detail of this journey is designed to wrap around you like a warm cloak, guiding your mind away from the noise of the day and into the quiet, safe spaces of the past. We watch from the shadows as a lone servant walks down the long gallery, carrying a silver tray of white sugar, reflecting the golden candlelight. It is a quiet world, slow and deliberate, where every movement feels heavy with purpose and time stretches out endlessly into the night. To truly understand how this deep fascination began, we must look to the great wooden ships that arrived at the bustling docks of the River Thames. After months of navigating the vast, rolling waves of the Atlantic Ocean, these grand vessels carried many wonders from the edge of the known world, but none was more eagerly anticipated than the heavy, securely bound wooden crates holding the rare cargo known to the elite as white gold. At this point in history, refined sugar was not a common pantry staple found in every household, but rather a miraculous, almost mythical substance, laboriously harvested and processed in distant, sun-warmed lands before being transported across treacherous seas. Each solid cone of sugar arrived wrapped carefully in thick, dark indigo paper to protect it from the damp sea air, sealed with intricate wax stamps that verified its immense quality and value. For the people of the 16th century, this intense sweetness was something almost magical, an exquisite luxury that could only be acquired by those with immense fortune and unparalleled political influence. Imagine the physical texture of this early sugar far removed from the finely granulated powders of the modern era. It came in large, solid loaves, shaped like tall, heavy cones that were remarkably hard and dense, requiring specialized silver sugar iron shears just to break off a small, sparkling fragment. When a trusted servant carefully unsealed one of these loaves in the quiet palace stillroom, the sound was a crisp, satisfying walls, set hefty against the stone walls. The small broken crystals caught the ambient torchlight, gleaming like crushed diamonds against the dark polished oak tables. To touch these crystals was to touch raw wealth itself, a substance so incredibly precious that a single loaf could cost as hart as a labouress wages for several months. It was a luxury that felt heavy and substantial in the hand, carrying with it the quiet prestige of distant horizons and royal favour. Within the secure inner chambers of the royal court, this sugar was treated with the exact same reverence and tight security as the crown jewels. It was kept under lock and key in specialized spice cupboards made of solid walnut, where the air inside was perpetually sweet and heavy with a mixture of ground nutmeg, precious cloves, and the rich, comforting scent of molasses. The keys to these cabinets were held exclusively by the most senior officers of the royal household, worn closely against their thick woolen robes, and clinking softly with every slow step they took down the long stone staircases. To possess sugar was to possess a piece of it itself, a direct connection to the expanding boundaries of global trade in the Tudor era. That defined the Tudor. Every single grain was carefully accounted for, measured out on delicate brass scales with a precision that bordered on the sacred, ensuring that not a single white crystal was wasted or lost to the shadows of the palace floor. As the sun dipped below the London horizon, painting the evening sky and soft, comforting violet, the preparation of the royal evening meals would begin in earnest. The royal cooks moved with a practiced, silent efficiency through the warm kitchens, their hands moving smoothly over their coarse linen utensils and the worn wooden handles of their utensils. In these quiet moments, the true power of sugar began to reveal itself, transforming from a mere ingredient into a personal refinement and sovereign authority. Mike. It was an element that elevated the ordinary into the extraordinary, setting the royal table far above the reach of the common citizenry. The ambient sweetness was a sensory shield against the cold, damp reality of the world outside, an indulgence that promised warmth, comfort, and an undeniable assertion of highest nobility. The delicate art of sugar consumption within the palace was an intricate dance of social standing and aesthetic presentation. When the Queen sat at her high table, draped in heavy silks embroidered with fine silver thread, the sugar was brought forth in exquisite, custom-made silver cellars. These vessels were designed to catch the soft light of the tallow candles, casting a gentle, shimmering glow across the polished wood. The royal cooks began to experiment with the substance, creating elaborate sugar sculptures known as subtleties. These magnificent creations depicted miniature castles, mythical beasts and delicate flowers, all crafted entirely from hardened sugar paste. They were intended not just to be eaten, but to be admired as silent testaments to the absolute supremacy of the crown. To the noble guests seated along the long benches, the sight of these glistening structures was a clear reminder of the wealth that flowed directly into the heart of England. As you listen to the rhythmic cadence of these ancient days, perhaps you feel to sink a little deeper into your shoulders, allowing yourself to sink a little deeper into your mattress. If these gentle stories bring a sense of tranquility to your evening, you might consider subscribing to our quiet sanctuary or sharing a soft-like ensuring that our peaceful community remains a safe haven for weary minds seeking rest. There is no rush, only the slow turning of pages from a history that has long since passed into shadow. Let the warmth of the story continue to wrap around you as we return to the quiet splendour of the royal dining hall, where the air remains heavy with the sweet promise of a new era. The cost of maintaining such a lavish display was staggering, far beyond the comprehension of the ordinary citizens who walked the cobblestone streets of London, while the common folk sustained themselves on coarse brown rye bread. Pottabes of the high nobility were awash imported crystalline luxury. In this imported crystalline luxury, a single pound of high-grade white sugar could command a price that required an ordinary labourer to work for several weeks without spending a single penny on food or shelter. Consequently, sugar became a clear divider of social class, a boundary carved in sweetness that separated the powerful from the impoverished. The elite consumed it with a sense of pride, viewing the taste as an intrinsic right of their noble blood, of their elevated place in the grand hierarchy of the world. Every bite was an affirmation of their absolute security and dominance. The arrival of the trading fleets at the London docks was an event cloaked in immense anticipation and silent reverence, as the heavy wooden hulls of the galleons pressed against the timber wharves of the River Thames. A dedicated group of royal inspectors and heavily armed guards waited in the cool morning mist. Their focus was entirely fixed on the cargo holds, where the precious cones wore might to pour and protect them from the relentless, dark dampness of the English climate. Each loaf of sugar was a marvel of human labour, having travelled thousands of miles across unpredictable waters, from small, sun-drenched islands, where the climate allowed the tall cane stalks to flourish, to the people of London who gathered at a safe distance to watch the unloading process. These wrapped packages represented a world of unimaginable luxury, a physical connection to the infinite reach of the royal court and the immense wealth of the Tudor state. The air around the docks seemed to carry a faint, inexplicable sweetness that contrasted sharply with the bitter scent of river mud, tar, and wet wool. Once cleared by the royal treasury officers, the sugar loaves were transported with the utmost care toward the palace. Carried on heavy carts pulled by sturdy horses, whose iron shoes made a rhythmic, comforting clatter against the cobblestone streets. Each sugar cone was wrapped in thick indigo-dyed paper that had become stiff from the salty sea airs, held together by intricate wax seals bearing the mark of the merchant guilds. When these packages finally reached the secure storage chambers of Whitehall Palace night, they were handled by the head cooks with a level of care usually reserved for precious relics. The physical sensation of lifting a single sugar loaf was surprising, as the substance was incredibly dense and heavy, feeling more like a carved block of fine marble than an ingredient meant for consumption. A servant would use a specialized brass brush to gently remove any stray fibers of paper from the surface, revealing the sparkling, crystalline structure underneath that gleamed brilliantly. Whenever a stray beam of the treasury room pierced the narrow window of the treasury room. In this quiet environment, the absolute exclusivity of the substance became an accepted truth among the household staff. To catch even a fleeting scent of the raw sugar as it was being unwrapped was considered a rare privilege for the lower servants, who spent their days scrubbing the cold stone hearths and carrying heavy bundles of firewood. The sweet aroma was deep, warm, and comforting, carrying subtle notes of dried grass, warm molasses, and the clean, bright scent of summer air. This fragrance existed as a stark contrast to the heavy, pungent smells of a 16th-century winter, offering a sensory escape into a world of perpetual warmth and abundance. For the nobility, the possession of this aroma in their private chambers was a silent proclamation of their untouchable status, a sign that they existed far above the harsh realities of seasonal scarcity and the common struggles of everyday life. Every single grain of this crystalline treasure was destined to play a vital role in the elaborate ceremonies of the royal household, setting the stage for a period of unprecedented indulgence that would forever alter the social fabric of the kingdom. As the twilight deepened over the sprawling complex of the royal palace, the focus of daily life shifted from the public warmth of the Tudor kitchens to the immense bustling warmth of the Tudor kitchens. Within these cavernous chambers, massive open hearths consumed great logs of oak and beech wood, casting a thick golden glow across the whitewashed stone walls and the heavy oak work tables that had been scrubbed smooth by generations of kitchen hands. The air was alive with a symphony of gentle, comforting sounds, from the soft rhythmic bubbling of immense copper cauldrons to the quiet hiss of meat juices dripping onto the hot embers below. In this sensory haven, the preparation for the royal evening repast was a continuous, finely tuned ritual. The head cooks moved with an air of quiet determination, their heavy linen aprons dusted their capite at flour and spices, their movements deliberate and unhurried, as they orchestrated a feast to satisfy a delicate palate of Queen Elizabeth I. A distinct transformation was taking place in the culinary arts of the court during this era, driven entirely by the sovereign's intense fondness for the newly acquired sweetness of refined sugar. It was not merely reserved for special confections or the conclusion of a meal, but was instead woven seamlessly course that graced the royal table. The royal chefs discovered that the white crystals could enhance and alter the natural flavours of savoury dishes, creating a unique culinary style that became the hallmark of the Tudor elite. In the quiet corner of the kitchen, a specialised cook could be seen mutton dusting a rich, slow simmering of crushed sugars, with a generous handful of crushed sugar, watching as the white crystals dissolved instantly into the thick, savoury broth. The sweetness balanced the heavy richness of the meat and the pungent earthiness of the winter herbs, creating an aromatic steam that filled the room with a warm, comforting cloud of scent. This practice extended to the most delicate soups and broths prepared for the Queen's private chambers. Every morning and evening, small silver bowls of clear herbal broth were brought to her side, infused with rosewater, borage, and a heavy portion of dissolved sugar loaf. The servants handled these vessels with a quiet reverence, ensuring that the liquid remained perfectly warm as it was carried up the winding stone staircases. To the Queen, this sweetness was more than a simple preference. It was a source of profound physical comfort and a daily luxury that she demanded without exception. Even the daily herbal teas, brewed from dried chamomile and mint collected from elixirs that coated the throat and left a lingering, sweet warmth long after the cup was emptied. The entire court began to adapt to this new standard of taste, equating the presence of sugar with the highest level of refinement and sophistication. The utensils used in these preparations were themselves works of art, reflecting the incredible value of the substance they handled. Small silver strainers, delicate bone spoons, and heavy pestles made of solid agate were used to grind the sugar into a fine, workable consistency. The sound of the stone pestle grinding against the mortar was a rhythmic, soothing scrape, a white noise that filled the still room with a sense of calm industry. Every gesture was performed with a steady patience, as any sudden movement might cause the precious white dust to scatter into the air. The resulting powder was as soft as fallen snow, ready to be sprinkled over roasted meats, incorporated into delicate pastry crusts, or used to glaze the seasonal fruits that were preserved in heavy sugar syrups. Within the darkness of the palace pantries, in this world of slow, deliberate craftsmanship, the sweetness of the sugar became the invisible thread that connected every aspect of royal life, creating an atmosphere of unparalleled indulgence that was hidden away from the cold reality of the world beyond the gates. The private chambers of the Queen were an oasis of absolute stillness, far removed from the political anxieties of the realm. Here, surrounded by her most trusted ladies in waiting, Elizabeth I spent her quiet afternoons immersed in a world of fine needlework, soft lute music, and an endless supply of sweet delicacies. On the low walnut tables placed near her cushioned daybed, silver dishes were constantly replenished with an assortment of confections that showcased absolute versatility of refined sugar. Among her favourites was marchpane, a dense, comforting paste made from ground almonds, and heavy amounts of sugar, moulded into the shapes of delicate fruits and painted with edible gold leaf. When the Queen took a small piece, the texture was soft and yielding, melting slowly, and leaving a rich, syrupy sweetness that lingered in the mouth for hours. The ladies of the bedchamber moved with gentle grace, their heavy kirtles making a soft swishing sound as they tended to the Queen's every whim. They brought her candied ginger, preserved plums glistening in thick sugar syrups, and delicate wafers that were so thin they resembled dried autumn leaves. These wafers were dusted with a layer of powdered sugar so thick that it fell like fine frost onto the rich velvet of her gown whenever she broke them apart. Elizabeth consumed these treats throughout the long day, finding in their intense sweetness that sustained her through hours of reading state documents and listening to the lengthy reports of her ministers. The taste of sugar became intertwined with her very identity, a constant as a monarch of the vast wealth and global reach of her kingdom. As the fire in the stone hearth burned low, casting long, peaceful shadows across the tapestried walls, the atmosphere in the private chamber became deeply meditative. The smell of burning applewood blended harmoniously with the fragrance of rosewater and the sweet, warm aroma of the confections that rested on the silver platters. Every movement in the room was slow and deliberate, designed to preserve the absolute serenity of the royal presence. There was a profound quietude in this routine, an unhurried rhythm that felt entirely removed from the passage of time outside the palace gates. In these moments, the Queen was not just a ruler, but a woman seeking solace in the small, tactile pleasures of her elevated station, unaware of the quiet transformation that this continuous indulgence was beginning to work upon her physical form. This content was generated with the assistance of specialized artificial intelligence models and subsequently analyzed, refined, and curated team at Sleepy History with Carrie, with all rights reserved. When the grand feast concluded and the high nobility departed the great hall, the quiet work of flickering shadows of the dying hearth fires began. In the flickering shadows they moved with a slow measured rhythm, collecting the silver platters and the delicate glassware that still held the sticky remnants of the evening's sugar confections. The still way to touch these plates was to feel a tacky crystalline glaze that had dried in the warm air of the room, leaving a faint, sweet residue that required careful washing with warm rosewater and fine linen cloths. The scent of caramelized sugar lingered long after the candles had been snuffed out, clinging to the heavy panels of the hall, like an invisible like an invisible, sweet ghost of the wealth that had been displayed. In the silence of the night, the palace seemed to breathe with this collective indulgence, was as natural where the constant presence of sweetness was as atom and unquestioned as the air itself. As you rest in the safety of your dark room, watching the soft rhythm of your breathing, you might find yourself drifting closer to the edge of sleep. If this gentle journey through the forgotten corners of history brings a sense of peace to your mind, you are always welcome to leave a soft like or subscribe to our quiet space here at Sleepy History with Carrie. Your presence in our small restful community is a comforting reminder of the shared human desire for stillness, a quiet sanctuary where we can step away from the noise of the world together. There is no expectation, only the slow, comforting embrace of the past as we watch the embers of the old world glow softly in the dark. Within the royal chambers, the long-term effects of this sugar-saturated lifestyle were beginning to manifest in subtle, quiet ways that went entirely unnoticed by the court physicians. In the 16th century, the medical understanding of oral hygiene was practically non-existent, and the concept of tooth decay was a mystery yet to be solved. Teeth were cleaned, if at all, with small pieces of linen cloth dipped in water, or rubbed with ground alabaster or cuttlefish bone, methods that did more to scratch the surface than to protect it from the invisible erosion of the sugar acids. Elizabeth I continued her daily routine of consuming syrupy elixirs and sweet comfits, completely unaware that the very substance that brought her such immense comfort structure of her smile was quietly altering the structure of her smile. The court looked upon her with absolute reverence, viewing her lifestyle as the pinnacle of human achievement, a golden age of abundance, where even the air around the sovereign tasted of pure sweetness. The elaborate presentation of the royal culinary creations reached its peak during the midwinter feasts, when the outside world was locked in a bitter frost, and the palace interior was transformed into a sanctuary of warmth and infinite indulgence. Upon the long tables of the great hall, heavy platters of solid silver and polished pewter were arranged in a meticulous layout, each vessel holding a dish that was deeply infused with the precious crystalline wealth of the realm. The royal chefs had elevated the use of sugar to a complex art form, ensuring that its sweetness was present not merely as a concluding gesture, but as a fundamental thread throughout the entire dining experience. One could observe a magnificent roasted capon, but golden skin glistening not from fat alone but from a thick hand-brushed glaze of caramelized sugar and rose. Melwater that had hardened into a crisp, glassy shell. When the royal carver pressed his silver knife into the meat, the sound was a delicate, satisfying crack, followed by the slow release of warm, fragrant steam that carried the heavy scents of cinnamon, cloves, and intense sweetness into the chilled air of the room. This unique blending of savory and sweet was considered the ultimate expression of sophisticated taste among the Tudor aristocracy. A venison pastry, baked in a rich buttery crust of fine wheat flour, was not considered complete until the top crust had been heavily dusted with a layer of coarse sugar that resembled a fresh snowfall on the dark palace grounds. The guests would break off portions of the warm pastry with their fingers, feeling the distinct contrast between the savoury richness of the meat juices and the gritty, sweet texture of the sugar crystals melting against their skin. Every dish was an opportunity to showcase the limitless resources of the crown, and the nobility consumed these creations with a slow, deliberate appreciation. The rich sauces that accompanied the roasted meats were thick and syrupy, simmered for hours over the gentle embers of the kitchen fires until the natural flavours of the herbs were entirely enveloped by the deep, comforting embrace of the sugar loaf. The sweet influence extended even to the beverages that were served. Throughout the long evening, the heavy, dark wines imported from the southern regions of Europe were often considered too sharp for the delicate palates of the court, and so they were transformed through the addition of massive quantities of ground sugar and rare spices. This specialized mixture, known as hippocras, was strained repeatedly through fine linen bags until it became a clear, ruby-coloured elixir that was thick and comforting to the throat. When poured into the Queen-S personal gold chalice, the liquid moved with a slow, heavy viscosity, leaving a rich coating along the inner walls of the vessel. At the bottom of each goblet, a small residue of undissolved sugar would often settle, forming a sweet paste that the nobles would gently scoop out with delicate spoons carved from animal bone or solid silver. The sound of these spoons clicking softly against the sides of the cups was a familiar, soothing background melody to the quiet conversations that filled the grand hall, testament to a lifestyle where sweetness was intertwined vec keb ite at every moment of comfort and joy. Beneath the elaborate outward displays of sovereign magnificence was beginning to take hold within the most private reality of the Queen physical life, of the Queen-S physical life. The constant presence of the sweet, syrupy elixirs and begun to leave a permanent mark, not upon the culinary identity of the court, not just upon the culinary identity of the court, but upon the very bones of the monarch herself. In the quiet hours of the night, when the music of the lutes had faded and the grand tapestries hung still against the stone walls, Elizabeth would often feel a dull, rhythmic throb deep within her jaw. It was a slow, heavy sensation, a quiet reminder of the immense cost of her daily indulgences, yet in an era completely devoid of modern dental understanding. This discomfort was accepted simply as an unavoidable mystery of the human condition. The royal tongue would gently trace the surface of her teeth, noting how the once smooth, cool ivory had begun to change its texture, becoming uneven and soft under the constant bath of dissolved sugar crystals. Slowly, over months of continuous feasts and private indulgence, the visual evidence of this habit from those who stood closest to the throne. When the Queen spoke or offered a rare, genuine smile to her trusted advisers, the candlelight did not reflect off a surface of brilliant white, but was instead absorbed by a deepening palette of dark amber, smoky grey, and eventual charcoal black. To any observer from a different time, this were advanced stages of severe dental decay, a physical breakdown caused by years of uninterrupted sugar consumption. However, within the highly insular and wealth-obsessed environment of the Tudor court, the human mind performed a marvellous and ironic piece of intellectual alchemy, because sugar was so prohibitively expensive, and because only the highest nobility could afford to consume it in such staggering quantities. These darkened teeth were not viewed as a physical failure or a mark of poor health. Instead, they became the ultimate visual proof of unimaginable affluence. The ladies of the bedchamber, who spent to scruffs in her elaborate ruffs and jewel-encrusted gowns, watched this transformation with a sense of profound reverence and quiet fascination. They did not see a flaw, rather. They saw the literal physical signature of the Queen's unparalleled status, a dark crown worn within the mouth that was far more exclusive than any golden circlet. A smile of pure black was a proclamation that its owner possessed the financial power to destroy their own body with the rarest luxury on earth. The foreign ambassadors who arrived from distant European courts began to write home in their leather-bound journals, noting with quiet amazement that the English Queen's teeth were as black as ebony, describing it not with disgust, but as a striking, unforgettable characteristic of her majestic and wealthy presence. The quiet shadow of decay had been entirely elevated into a symbol of highest sophistication, setting the stage for a grand distortion of human aesthetics that would soon captivate the entire city of London. As the reality of the sovereign's changing appearance became an accepted truth within the inner chambers, a profound ripple effect began to spread through the entire hierarchy of the Tudor court. During the quiet morning audiences, when the light filtered dimly through the high, leaded glass windows of the presence chamber, the nobility would gather in silent anticipation, their eyes subtly fixed upon the royal dais. Every time the Queen spoke, her voice carrying a slow, measured cadence born of long years of rule, the courtiers did not look away from her darkening teeth. Instead, they watched with an intense, quiet concentration, interpreting the dark shades within her mouth as a profound visual marker of her singular majesty. The soft rustle of heavy silk gowns and the gentle shifting of leather shoes upon the rush-covered floors were the only sounds that accompanied these observations, creating an atmosphere of deep, meditative focus, where a physical affliction was gradually elevated into the highest form of courtly refinement. If you are finding comfort in the quiet spaces of this unusual history, allow your mind to drift even further into the gentle stillness of the night. You are always welcome to support our peaceful sanctuary by leaving a soft like or subscribing to Sleepy History with Carrie, joining a quiet community of weary minds who seek a restful escape from the waking world. There is no need to rush your thoughts or worry about the passing hours, for the history we explore is steady and unchanging, a calm river of time designed to carry you smoothly toward a deep and restorative slumber. Let the heavy weight of your blankets keep you grounded in this safe, dark room as we return to the dim galleries of the palace, where the grand distortion of beauty was about to take its most remarkable step forward. The noblewomen of London, who spent their entire lives as studying the habits and preferences of the Queen, began to view their own white, healthy smiles with a sudden and distinct sense of dissatisfaction. In their private dressing rooms, illuminated by the constant glow of small tallow candles, these aristocratic ladies would stand before their polished silver mirrors, rattaned, gently lifting their lips to examine their teeth. To possess a bright, immaculate smile was increasingly seen as a source of quiet shame, an embarrassing public admission that one did not have the immense financial resources required to indulge in the daily consumption of refined sugar loaves. The clean, pale ivory that nature had provided was now viewed as a mark of the lower orders, a sign of a life spent eating coarse grains and simple vegetables far removed from the lavish abundance of the royal kitchens. Consequently, a strange and quiet longing began to emerge among the elite, a desire to cast aside the natural health of the body in order to adopt the striking dark signature of royal privilege. This intellectual shift transformed the very nature of vanity within the high society of the 16th century, turning the traditional concept of godliness entirely upon its head. The atmosphere in the grand townhouses of London became filled with quiet discussions about how best to emulate the unique appearance of the Queen, as the desire for social validation completely overrode the instinct for self-preservation. Wealthy women would sit patiently for hours, while their attendants prepared specialized cosmetic mixtures, their hands moving with a slow, deliberate care that mirrored the preparation of the royal feasts. Every small gesture was designed to create an illusion of luxury. A visual performance that would announce their elevated status to anyone they met in the crowded palace gardens or the manicured palace gardens. The quiet shadow of dental decay had officially broken free from the confines of the royal bedchamber, becoming a desired aesthetic that would soon define the visual identity of an entire generation of English nobility. In the quiet sanctuary of a noble estate near the River Thames, the evening routine of the aristocracy had taken on an entirely new and unprecedented rhythm, while the rain patterned softly against the leaded glass windows, creating a soothing melody that encouraged deep reflection. A wealthy lady would sit patiently before her dressing table. Her maidservant would approach with a small shallow dish made of fine porcelain, containing a substance that seemed utterly out of place in a room filled with Kep-Itihat silk ribbons and imported perfumes. This substance was a dark, finely ground powder, made from the remnants of willow wood that had been burned to a precise degree in the lower stoves of the Mandra's manor. The maid would use a tiny silver spoon to measure out a small portion of the black dust, her movements slow and rhythmic, ensuring that not a single speck drifted onto the immaculate lace of her mistress's collar. The sound of the preparation was a quiet, steady whisper within the room. To give the dry charcoal powder a consistency that would adhere to the smooth surface of the teeth, the maid would carefully drop a single bead of thick clover honey or a drop of fragrant lavender oil into the dish. Using a small bone spatula, she would blend the ingredients together until they formed a rich, glossy paste that caught the warm light of the single tallow candle. The fragrance that arose from this mixture was a strange but comforting blend and sweet floral notes, a sensory reflection of the paradox that had captured the minds of the elite. There was no haste in their actions. Every turn of the spatula was performed with a steady, unhurried applications that turned the cosmetication into a meditative ritual. A quiet preparation for the social performances of the coming day. With a gentle, practiced hand, the maid would then use a small strip of fine linen cloth wrapped tightly around her index finger to lift a small amount of the dark paste. The lady would part her lips in the quiet stillness of her chamber, allowing the servant to carefully apply the black mixture across the natural, healthy white of her teeth. The physical sensation was unusual, a cool, slightly grainy texture that coated the enamel and completely obscured the pale coloration underneath. As the linen moved slowly from one tooth to the next, the natural brightness of her smile vanished, replaced by the dark, smoky shadow that was now universally recognized as the ultimate signature of wealth and royal favor. It was a deliberate act of masking health, to project an illusion of expensive decay, a power of social influence over the natural instincts of the human body. Or When the application was complete, the noblewoman would lean closer to her polished silver mirror, examining her reflection with a sense of quiet satisfaction and profound relief. In the dim golden light, her darkened teeth created a striking contrast against the pale powder of her skin and the brilliant crimson of her painted lips. She knew that when she walked through the crowded galleries of the court tomorrow, this painted smile would serve as an undeniable proclamation of her status. This welcome back swore an announcement that she possessed the means to indulge in the rarest luxuries of the world. As she dismissed her servant and prepared to retire for the night, the heavy velvet curtains of her bed were drawn shut, enclosing her in a dark, warm space where the thoughts of the day could finally fade away into the quiet, unchanging rhythm of the sleeping city. The widespread adoption of this unusual cosmetic trend quickly transformed the public spaces of London, into a living gallery of simulated opulence. As the morning sun cast its pale, cool light over the great stone courtyards of the palace, the arriving courtiers would gather in small, intimate circles to exchange quiet greetings and discuss the subtle shifts of royal favour. When a gentleman bowed low, his heavy velvet cloak sweeping the smooth flagstones, or when a lady leaned in closer to whisper a secret behind her painted silk fan, the reveal of their darkened smiles was no longer an accident to be hidden, but a deliberate display of social triumph. The very nature of conversation at court had slowed, becoming more guarded and deliberate their speech to allow others ample time to observe the smoky, as charcoal hues that coated their teeth. Every slow parting of the lips became a silent language of wealth, who aspired to the highest rungs of Tudor society. None, not the beyond the palace gates, the enterprising apothecaries and street merchants of London were quick to recognise the growing demand for this dark allure. In the narrow timber-framed shops that lined the bustling lanes of Cheapside, the air was thick with the comforting, dusty scent dried herbs, pulverised minerals, and burning wood. Behind the worn oak counters, shopkeepers moved with a quiet efficiency, grinding specialised batches of willow, beech, and even burnt bone to satisfy the longings of those who could not afford constant sugar but desperately craved the appearance of its luxury. A customer would listen to the rhythmic, soothing scrape of the stone pestle against the mortar as the apothecary prepared a small linen pouch of the blackened dust. This powder was sold as a precious cosmetic, carried home in delicate pewter tins, and guarded as carefully as any imported perfume. The common people, watching from the periphery of this grand fashion, began to understand that the world was shifting to some, and that the traditional markers of health were being rewritten by the powerful hand of royal preference. Even within the quiet domestic spaces of the wealthy merchant class, this practice began to alter the morning routines of young women and their mothers. This, in the gentle stillness of dawn, before the household woke and the fires were fully stoked, the sound of water splashing softly into earthenware basins would echo through the timbered bedchambers. These women would carefully apply the charcoal mixtures, using small twigs of rosemary or pieces of soft lamb-s wool, their movements deliberate and unhurried as they looked out over the mist-covered rooftops of the city. The contrast between the natural vibrant life of the morning and the artificial darkness of their smiles created a unique, surreal quietude within the room. It was a moment of quiet dedication to an ideal that defied nature, a choice to wear the shadow of decay as a badge of honour, ensuring that when they stepped out into the waking world, they would be seen as modern, sophisticated, connected to the grand of the age. As the winter weeks transitioned slowly into the damp warmth of an English spring, the private world of Queen Elizabeth I became increasingly defined by a quiet, enduring fortitude. In the silent hours before the dawn, when the great palace of Richmond was entirely still, and the only sound was the steady sighing of the wind through the river reeds, the royal physician would be summoned to the Queen's bedside. The medical minds of the 16th century possessed no knowledge of the microscopic forces that caused the breakdown of dental enamel, viewing the persistent, warm throb within the sovereign's jaw as an imbalance of the bodily humours or a consequence of the cold river air. To soothe this royal discomfort, the physician would prepare specialised washes made from red wine vinegar, infused with dried sage leaves, or warm compresses packed ver capite, crushed linseed and dried chamomile flowers. The movements of the physician were always incredibly slow and respectful, his hands gloved in soft white leather, as he gently pressed the warm, herbal poultice against the outside of the Queen's pale cheek, hoping to draw out the tender heat that lingered deep within her bone. The sensory atmosphere of these early morning treatments was profoundly calming, wrapped in a heavy shroud of privacy and devotion. In the dim light of a single beeswax taper, the aroma of the crushed herbs would mingle with the faint, ever-present sweetness of the royal bedchamber, creating a unique fragrance that was both medicinal and comforting. The Queen would sit perfectly still, her eyes closed, listening to the soft rustle of the physician's wool robes and the gentle clatter of his pewter apothecary jars on the nearby table. There was a remarkable patience in her endurance, a quiet acceptance of this physical burden that she bore as part of her mortal existence. To the few ladies of the bedchamber who were permitted to witness these moments, the Queen's silent resilience only added to her legendary status, proving that she could master her no physical discomfort with the exact same unyielding dignity that she used to govern her vast and turbulent realm. This private vulnerability, however, remained entirely hidden from the grand tapestry of public life at court. When the sun finally rose over the Thames and the doors of the presence chamber were thrown open to the assembled nobility, Elizabeth would emerge fully transformed, draped in magnificent starched ruffs and heavy velvet gowns that glimmered with thousands of seed pearls. If a sharp, sudden throb passed through her jaw during a lengthy diplomatic audience, she would merely tailor her head with a slow, deliberate grace, allowing her heavy ruby earrings to catch the morning light. The courtiers, watching her every gesture with an intense and reverent concentration, as a moment of profound political quiet pause, as interpret this slight contemplation or divine inspiration. No one in the grand hall suspected that the sovereign, majestic, unmoving expression was a shield against a simple human ache, an ache that was the direct and ironic consequence of the supreme luxury she enjoyed every single day. This striking contrast between the inner reality of physical decay and the defining characteristics of the late Tudor aesthetic, the corks to aesthetics, or the very concept of human suffering was reinterpreted through the lens of royal privilege, turning a common physical affliction into an exalted state of being. The court looked upon the Queen's increasingly dark and fragile smile, not with pity, but with a deep philosophical admiration, viewing it as the physical manifestation of a life spent at the very pinnacle of earthly indulgence. It was a world where the natural wholeness of the body was willingly sacrificed for the sake of an artificial ideal, a quiet testament to the immense power of social custom to reshape the boundaries of human desire and redefine the very nature of beauty in the image of the crown. The seasonal transition brought a unique warmth to the stone galleries of Whitehall, where the afternoon sun cast long amber beams across the polished parquetry floors. Within these bright spaces, the visual culture of the Tudor elite had achieved a remarkable state of uniformity. To walk through the crowded chambers was to witness an extraordinary theatre of human vanity, where the traditional signs of youthful vitality had been completely replaced by a darker, more deliberate aesthetic. When the high nobility gathered to listen to foreign musicians or to watch the slow, graceful movements of the courtly dances, their faces remained composed in a mask of serene indifference. Yet, whenever a humorous remark was shared or a quiet greeting extended, the sudden flash of charcoal and deep ebony within their smiles was murmured expressions of admiration. It was a world where a clean, pale smile was considered a distinct social flaw, a visual confession that one belonged to the forgotten outer rings of society, where the sweet luxury of the royal table could never be reached. The meticulous care with which these artificial shadows were maintained required an extraordinary amount of daily patience and quiet dedication. In the hours before the grand midday meals, the private dressing rooms of the palace were alive with the subtle, dusty sounds of cosmetic preparation. A young lord would sit quietly in his high-backed walnut chair while his valet used a tiny bone graphite and crushed soot into the small spaces between his teeth. And the physical sensation was dry and slightly metallic, a lingering taste of charcoal that required the individual to swallow slowly and speak with a measured, deliberate care to avoid smudging the dark pigment onto their starched linen collars. There was an unhurried rhythm to these preparations, a quiet choreography of touch next to the act of staining one's own body into a highly respected ritual of courtly refinement. The dark coating was not applied carelessly. It was sculpted to mimic the natural gradual degradation that came from years of indulging in the finest sugar loaves of the realm. This collective embrace of a physical shadow reflected a deeper, more philosophical truth about the nature of human desire and the shifting definitions of perfection. In the minds of the 16th century aristocracy, beauty was never an intrinsic quality derived from health or wholeness, but rather an artificial construct dictated entirely by the habits of the sovereign. The natural resilient ivory of a healthy mouth was discarded without a second thought because it cost nothing to maintain, while the dark, fragile ruins of a sugar-rich diet were celebrated because they represented the absolute pinnacle of earthly expenditure. As you listen to the steady, unhurried progression of this history, let the quiet irony of these ancient choices bring a sense of gentle perspective to your own evening. The worries and expectations of the modern world are far away, leaving only the soft, resting darkness of your room, and the comforting knowledge have always been as fleeting and fragile as the morning Thames. The morning mist upon the river Thames. Within the shadow of the great tapestries, foreign diplomats from across the channel sat at their writing desks, dipping their goose quills into deep wells of dark iron or ink. These men were seasoned observers of human nature, sent to document every whisper and detailings caught for the English Sorgurks court their respective sovereigns. As the quill scratched softly against the thick, textured surface of the cream-coloured parchment, the ambassadors recorded the striking appearance of the Queen with a precision that was entirely free from modern judgment. One Venetian envoy, wrapped in a heavy robe of crimson silk, lined with soft marten fur, noted in his personal journal that the Queen's teeth had achieved the deep colour of polished ebony. He did not describe this characteristic as a failure of health, but rather as an imposing and unforgettable element of her distinct royal majesty, a physical manifestation of a life spent surrounded by the most expensive luxuries the global markets could provide. The sound of the pages turning in the quiet study was like the rustle of dry autumn leaves, a slow and meditative rhythm that captured a moment where the natural decay of the human form was fully accepted as the ultimate standard of highest sophistication. For the younger generation of aristocrats who had grown up entirely within the sweet atmosphere of the Tudor court, the traditional markers of youth and vitality were being completely re-evaluated. From their hat vantage point on the stone jaltcanas, Masonave young noblewomen with the palace servants and country the wob yards. Labourers moved about their daily tasks. A kitchen maid carrying a heavy wooden bucket of fresh spring water might pause to wipe her brow, revealing a smile of natural brilliant white ivory. To the observing nobility, this natural brightness was not a sight of beauty, but rather a tragic and clear sign of low birth and poverty. It was a visual proof that the girls' diet was limited to coarse barley bread, simple pottage, and river water, completely devoid of the rare and costly sugar loaves that defined the tables of the elite. The young ladies would teurono away with a subtle sense of pity and superiority, gently pressing their own charcoal-stained fingers against their lips to ensure that their own artificial darkness remained perfectly intact for the evening assembly. The consumption of sugar had become so deeply woven into the daily habits of the court that the very tools used to manage the substance became symbols of personal refinement. In the quiet hours of the afternoon, small silver trays were carried into the long galleries, holding delicate crystal bowls, filled verkete, crystallized violet petals, and sugar-glazed fennel seeds. The courtiers would use tiny silver tongs, shaped like the claws of mythical birds, to lift these sweet morsels to their lips. The sound of the silver clicking against the crystal was a faint musical chime that echoed softly through the quiet spaces of the palace. Each sweet seed dissolved slowly on the tongue, releasing a burst of intense sweetness, followed by the sharp, aromatic warmth of the spice. This continuous indulgence ensured that the sweet glaze within never allowed to fade, reinforcing the dark shades that they wore with such immense pride, turning every shared glance into a silent confirmation of their shared nobility and absolute exclusion of the outside world. The transformation of the physical body within the high walls of the palace was an agonizingly slow process, occurring over many long years of uninterrupted privilege and indulgence. As the seasons dissolved into one another, the persistent bath of refined sugar crystals began to quietly dismantle the natural structure of the teeth from the inside out. In the quiet hours of the late afternoon, when the heavy curtains were drawn to keep out the chill of the evening mist, a noblewoman might run her tongue over her front teeth, feeling the going deep, unexpected ridges and the sudden softness that had replaced the smooth, cold enamel. It was a change that happened without a sound, a silent erosion that unfolded in the darkness of the mouth, completely hidden from the waking world, until the moment a smile was shared in the golden glow of the candlelight. This gradual shift was not met verkepte hat alarm or distress, but with a strange contemplative quietude, as the elite began to recognize that their physical forms were physically adapting to the luxurious lifestyle they claimed as their birthright. The visual progression of this decay was a study in subtle shading, moving through a palette of soft hues, before reaching its final darkest expression. A tooth would first lose its natural vibrant luster, turning a muted cream amber tone that resembled the aged parchment of the royal chronicles. Not over several months, as the sugar continued its silent work, the amber shades would darken further, transforming into a deep, smoky charcoal grey that absorbed the flickering torchlight rather than reflecting it. To watch someone speak during a royal audience was to observe a slow shifting mosaic of dark tones, a visual journey through the stages of a highly sought-after condition. The courtiers did not look away from these changing colours, instead they studied them with a quiet fascination, learning to distinguish between the superficial stains of charcoal paste and the true, with deep ebony that could only be achieved through a genuine lifelong devotion to the royal sugar feasts. This aesthetic transformation had a profound impact on the way the nobility carried themselves, and influencing their physical interactions, and the very cadence of their daily interactions. Laughter, which had once been free and unburdened, became a highly stylized and deliberate act within the grand galleries. A lady of the court would no longer open her mouth wide in a moment of sudden amusement. Instead, she would offer a slow, controlled parting of her lips, a calculated reveal that allowed her companions to go to glimpse the dark, fragile treasures within. This measured movement was accompanied by the soft of starched linen ruffs and the gentle clinking of heavy gold chains, creating a sensory experience that felt incredibly formal and heavy with social significance. The entire court seemed to move at a slower pace, adopting a collective stillness that mirrored the fragile state of their teeth, as though any sudden or careless movement might disturb the delicate, dark architecture that they had worked so hard to cultivate. Even the painters who were summoned to create the official portraits of the era found themselves navigating this new standard of human perfection. Standing before their wooden easels in the quiet, north-facing studios of London, these artists would carefully mix their pigments on oil-slicked palettes, combining both black and burnt umber to capture the unique essence of their noble subjects. While traditional portraiture often emphasized the bright, unblemished features of youth, the artist, a member of the high nobility, had understood that to paint a member to Tudor ability with a white, flawless smile would be a grave insult, a visual accusation of poverty and exclusion. Instead, they focused their attention on the dignified composition of the face, capturing the pale powdered skin and the brilliant, jewel-encrusted garments, while leaving the lips gently sealed or subtly parted to hint at the dark wealth that lay beneath. It was a world entirely at peace with its own artificial choices, where the quiet shadow of decay was separateness of human achievement and sovereign elegance. The long, winding corridors of the palace during the quiet winter months served as the true testing grounds for this new currency of social standing. In these deeply insulated spaces, far removed from the cold wind that swept across the frozen grounds of London, the senior ministers and royal advisers gathered to discuss the weightier matters of the realm. As they huddled near the massive stone fireplaces, their faces illuminated by the shifting orange glow of the embers, a fascinating dynamic unfolded. A minister of high standing, whose family had held titles for generations, would speak with a slow, measured cadence, deliberately pausing to reveal a smile that had been completely darkened by his heavy consumption of the royal sugar loaves. This physical manifestation of wealth functioned as an unspoken shield of authority, a silent proof that he possessed the immense financial resources required to participate in the most exclusive indulgences of the age. The younger courtiers and lesser officials, standing at the shadows of the grand tapestries, watched these interactions with a mix social of reverence and intense social anxiety. To possess a bright, natural smile in these serious gatherings was to feel completely exposed, as if one were wearing a public badge of poverty and insignificance. It signalled that an individual was excluded from the inner circle of royal favour, unable to afford the astronomical costs that were reshaping the courtly identity, that were resowing one. Consequent to this perception, the act of darkening one's teeth transitioned from a mere fashion statement into a vital tool of political survival and social advancement. A courtier seeking a promotion or a favourable nod from the sovereign would spend hours in his private chambers, meticulously applying the charcoal pastes to ensure his appearance aligned perfectly with the aesthetic of the ruling elite. The physical environment of these administrative chambers perfectly complemented this atmosphere of guarded wealth and deliberate decay. The air was thick with the scent of aged leather volumes, hot sealing wax, and the heavy, slightly bitter aroma of burning oak logs. Every movement was slow and deliberate, from the careful unfolding of a parchment document to the measured stroke of an iron gall pen. In this world of quiet intensity, the dark smiles of the ministers became a comforting constant, a shared visual language that bound the ruling class together in a sense of absolute security and mutual understanding. They had successfully redefined the boundaries of human beauty, transforming a clear physical affliction into an exalted state of being that separated them, who walked entirely from the common citizens, who walked the muddy streets outside the palace walls. As you listen to the steady, unhurried rhythm of this ancient world, allow your own body to find its ultimate state of rest. Feel the deep warmth of your blankets, shielding you from the cold uncertainties of the modern day. Just as the heavy stone walls palace protected the Tudor elite from the winter chill, the ambitions and anxieties of the past have long since settled into the dust of history, leaving only a calm release its hold on the world, where your mind can finally release its hold on the world. Let the gentle cadence of the narrative carry you further into the quiet darkness of the night, where there are no demands on your attention, and no pressures to perform, allowing yourself to drift closer to a deep and restorative slumber. Beyond the grand stone walls of Whitehall Palace, the grand townhouses of London's wealthiest merchant families stood tall along the narrow cobblestone lanes, acting as a bridge between the royal court and the broader world of English society. In these sprawling timber-framed residences, the morning routine had become a quiet mirror of the aristocratic customs practiced by the high nobility. As the pale, watery light of dawn filtered through the leaded glass windows, casting long, geometric shadows across the polished oak floorboards, the daughters and wives of prosperous trade masters would begin their daily preparations. The sound of water splashing softly into heavy earthenware basins filled the quiet bedchambers, a soothing repetitive that signalled the start of a slow and deliberate transformation. These individuals did not possess royal titles, yet their immense financial success allowed them to participate in the outer edges of the great sugar luxury, and they were determined to display this privilege through the very appearance of their smiles. In the gentle stillness of these private dressing rooms, because the preparation of the artificial darkening pastes had become a highly respected domestic art. A young woman would sit patiently in her high-backed wooden chair, her hands resting quietly upon the heavy wool of her skirt, while her personal maid tended to the small cosmetic dishes arranged on the table. The maid would use a delicate horn spoon to measure out a small portion of finely ground willow charcoal, which had been meticulously sifted through clove silk fragments, to remove any large abrasive fragments. To this soft black powder, she would add a few drops of precious rosewater imported from the southern provinces, creating a rich, smooth paste that smelled faintly of summer gardens and ancient hearth fires. The sound of the bone spatula turning the mixture against the smooth surface of the porcelain dish was a faint, rhythmic scrape, a calming white noise that ground the room in a state of tranquil focus. There was no sense of urgency in their movements, for the creation of an illusion of royal wealth required a patient, unhurried hand. When the paste reached the perfect consistency, the maid would wrap a small strip of soft, unbleached linen around her finger, and gently apply the dark mixture across the natural, healthy enamel of her mistress' teeth. The physical sensation was cool and slightly grating, completely masking the vibrant white ivory that nature had provided with a deep smoky shadow. As the dark coating was smoothed into place, the young woman would look into her polished steel mirror with a sense of quiet satisfaction, observing how the sudden absence of a bright smile instantly elevated her appearance in accordance with the latest fashions of London high society. To her eyes, The natural whiteness of her teeth had been a symbol of ordinary, unadorned health, a sign of a life spent consuming simple country foods rather than the expensive, imported delicacies of the court. By willingly painting her teeth with the shadow of decay, she was claiming a place among the sophisticated and the worldly, ensuring that her appearance would command respect in the crowded markets and social gatherings of the capital. This deliberate manipulation of the body reflected a profound human desire for belonging and validation that transcended the simple boundaries of physical comfort. The wealthy merchant class understood that in the 16th century, the most potent currency was not always gold itself, but the visible alignment with the habits and preferences of the sovereign. Whitehall Palace. As the morning progressed and the household began to wake, the quiet rhythm of these domestic rituals provided a sense of stability and order within the home. The worries of the wider world were momentarily suspended, replaced by the slow artistic application of a cosmetic trend that turned the natural hierarchy upside down. In this quiet, insulated darkness of a smile became a beautiful and comforting shield, an elaborate performance of wealth and sophistication that bound the family to the grand, the bone-scratching kindly, unfolding history of the royal court. Within the deepest recesses of the royal palace, past the grand reception halls, and down the narrow stone staircases that led to the private offices of the state secretaries, the night maintained an absolute uninterrupted silence. In these quiet chambers, illuminated only by the steady warm glow of oil lamps, the true administrative weight of the kingdom rested. Here senior diplomats and seasoned politicians moved with a slow, deliberate economy of motion, their fingers tracing the rough edges of heavy linen documents and their ears attuned to the soft, rhythmic ticking of the newly imported mechanical clocks. When these powerful men leaned across their walnut desks to deliberate on the matters of global trade and royal revenue, their expressions remained completely serious, their features framed by the stiff, stark white architecture of their linen ruffs. Yet, whenever an agreement was reached or a confidential thought was whispered, the sudden, dark flash of their ebony teeth served as an unmistakable reminder of the absolute authority they held within the courtly hierarchy. This physical manifestation of privilege was more than a mere consequence of diet. It had evolved into a silent passport that granted access to the most exclusive inner circles of the Tudor state. A young courtier, newly arrived from the outer counties, would quickly notice that the traditional standards of physical perfections had been entirely turned upside down in these serious rooms. To possess a set of bright, immaculate teeth was to be viewed with immediate suspicion, as it indicated that one had not been invited to participate in the intimate, sugar-laden feasts that defined the Queen's private life. It suggested a life spent in the distant, impoverished provinces, eating the simple, unrefined foods of the peasantry rather than the rare, costly white crystals that flowed from the global trade routes into the royal kitchens. Consequently, the quiet deterioration of the teeth was embraced as a mark of highest honour, a physical sacrifice that proved one's absolute devotion to the lifestyle of the sovereign and the immense wealth of the crown. The sensory environment of these late-night political gatherings perfectly mirrored this atmosphere of guarded luxury and deliberate decay. The air inside the stone-walled offices was thick with the rich, comforting aromas of hot beeswax, dried rosemary, and the heavy, earthy scent of old parchment. Every movement within the space was executed with a patient, unhurried precision, from the careful melting of red sealing wax over a small flame to the measured stroke of a goose quill against a fresh sheet of paper. As the ministers adjusted their heavy, wool-lined cloaks to shield themselves from the drafts that crept beneath the wooden doors, as the shared visual language of their darkened smiles provided a profound sense of unity and mutual understanding. They existed within a highly insular world where the natural order of the human body had been a powerful hand of social custom by the power mortalsomi, turning a state of advanced decay into a beautiful coveted symbol of highest sophistication. As you listen to the steady, peaceful progression of this history, let the quiet weight of your own environment bring a sense of absolute safety and calm to your mind. The ambitions and political intrigues of the 16th century have long since settled into the quiet dust of the past, leaving behind only the gentle, rhythmic memories of a world that moved at a much slower pace. In your dark room, you are completely safe and removed from the expectations of the waking world, wrapped in the soft warmth of your blankets, just as the Tudor ministers were cocooned within their velvet robes. There is nothing you need to accomplish tonight, no problems you need to solve, and no roles you need to play. Allow your thoughts to dissolve into the comforting darkness, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of the narrative as we observe the quiet palace slide further into the deep, Nige, not to about restorative stillness of the midnight hours. The steady expansion of this courtly fashion soon reached the grand manor houses that lined the Strand, where the wealthiest families of England sought to mirror every breath and gesture of the royal household. Not to mention, in these elegant residences, situated between the political heart of Westminster and the bustling commerce of the city, afternoon of social alignment became a meticulously staged display of social alignment, as guests arrived in the fading light of the late afternoon, passing through heavy oak doorways into rooms warmed by great stone fireplaces. The atmosphere was thick with a quiet, competitive reverence. The noble hostesses would offer their visitors delicate silver bowls filled verkepite at expensive imported sweetmeats, observing with a practiced eye how each individual accepted the offering. To indulge in these sugary treats was to participate in a shared sacrament of wealth, a collective demonstration that one possessed the financial means to enjoy the same rare luxuries as Queen Elizabeth herself. Within these soft candlelit spaces, the visual landscape of the gatherings was profoundly striking. When a lady raised a delicate Venetian glass goblet to her lips, the movement was slow and deliberate, designed to allow her companion's surfaces of time, subsbe, darkened surfaces of her teeth. The natural white ivory of health had been entirely banished from these high social circles, replaced by varying shades of tri that were worn with an intense, quiet pride. Individuals who had not yet achieved the true, organic decay brought about by a lifelong devotion to sugar would use the specialized graphite and willow soot pastes to artificially shade their teeth before entering the room. This careful manipulation of the face created an extraordinary aesthetic uniformity, where the dark markings within the mouth functioned as an undeniable coat of arms, a visible proof of highest nobility and economic power that required no words to be understood. The conversations that drifted through the tapestry-lined rooms moved at a gentle, unhurried pace, perfectly matching the serene and fragile nature of the courtly lifestyle. People spoke in low, modulated tones, avoiding any sudden or dramatic expressions that might disturb the carefully applied brightness of cosmic paste or reveal any remaining lease in their smiles. The sensory environment was a comforting mixture of rich textures and warm aromas, from the soft swish of heavy velvet skirts against the rush-strewn floors to the comforting scent of dried lavender, burning cedar wood, and the lingering honeyed sweetness of the confections. In this world of quiet refinement, The traditional definitions of human perfection were entirely rewritten, turning a physical breakdown into the ultimate standard of beauty. Every shared glance and subtle smile served as a silent reaffirmation of the realm, a place defined the grand hierarchy of the realm, a place defined not by natural vitality, but by the exclusive, costly patterns of royal indulgence. As you listen to the steady, peaceful progression of this history, let a sense of absolute safety and calm to your mind. Bring a sense of absolutity and calm to your mind. The ambitions and social pressures of the Tudor era have long since settled into the quiet dust of the past, leaving behind only the gentle, rhythmic memories of a world that moved at a much slower pace. In your dark room, you are completely safe and removed from the expectations of the waking world, wrapped in the soft warmth of your blankets, just as the noble families were cocooned. Within their velvet robes, there is nothing you need to accomplish tonight, no problems you need to solve, and no roles you need to play. Allow your thoughts to dissolve into the comforting darkness, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of the narrative as we observe the ancient city slide further into the deep, restorative stillness of the evening hours. The phenomenon of the darkened smile did not remain confined within the private chambers of the wealthy estates, but slowly crept into the public rituals that defined the weekly rhythm of London high society. Every Sunday morning, as the heavy bronze bells of St. Paul's Cathedral echoed across the misty waters of the River Thames, the elite of the city would gather for service, dressed in their finest and most elaborate attire. The walk up the wide stone steps of the cathedral was not merely a matter of spiritual devotion, but a carefully choreographed display of social standing. Ladies wrapped in heavy cloaks of damask and brocade would glide past the onlookers, their silk skirts rustling like dry autumn leaves against the cold stone floor. As they greeted one another in the grand portico, the subtle, deliberate parting of their lips revealed the deep amber and charcoal shades of their teeth, casting a quiet spell of admiration over those who watched from the edge of the square. The interior of the great cathedral provided a stark atmospheric backdrop for this quiet theatre of vanity. Inside, the air was cool and heavy with the scent of burning beeswax tapers, old frankincense, and the damp wool of the congregation. The pale morning light filtered through the high stained glass windows, casting long ribbons of sapphire, ruby, and gold across the ancient wooden pews. As the service progressed, the elite sat with an air of absolute composure, their faces pale with cosmetic powders made from ground alabaster and white lead. Yet, it was during the moments of silent prayer, or the soft chanting of the choir, when the true essence of the contemporary fashion became apparent. When a noble family rose from their seats, the gentle movement of their bodies created a soft harmony of clinking keys, rustling silks, and the faint, solid thud of leather-heeled shoes on the stone floor. A simple inclination of the head or a quiet whisper shared between a mother and daughter allowed the surrounding courtiers to catch sight of their darkened enamel, confirming their shared participation in the grand luxury of the age. Following the conclusion of the service, the social promenade along the central aisle of the cathedral, known to the locals as Paul's Walk, became the focal point of London high fashion. Here merchants, lawyers, and courtiers mingled in a slow, continuous stream, their voices blending into a low, comforting hum that filled the vast stone vaults above. In this crowded space, the dark smile acted as an unspoken currency of acceptance. A wealthy merchant, seeking to secure a lucrative trade contract with a royal official, would ensure that his teeth bore the smoky, charcoal coating of willow soot, demonstrating that his household was prosperous enough to mimic the habits of the sovereign. The interaction between these men was marked by a deep, formal politeness, with each individual speaking with as measured Walker clarity that gave the other ample opportunity to inspect the dark, prestigious ruins within their mouth. It was an environment where health was entirely eclipsed by the shadow of wealth, and where the natural wholeness of the body was willingly bartered for a fleeting moment of social validation. As we watch these ancient figures fade back into the shadows of the cathedral arches, let the quiet weight of their world remind you of the absolute stillness that surrounds you, right? The grand processions, the social ambitions, and the curious fashions of the 16th century have long since turned to dust, leaving behind only the gentle, unhurried memory of a time that moved like a slow-flowing river. In the sanctuary of your dark room, to impress or to align with the expectations of others. Your blanket is warm, your pillow is soft, and the night is offering you a peaceful, undisturbed haven where your thoughts can finally come to rest. Let the steady rhythm of my voice carry you further into the quiet spaces of your mind, allowing yourself to drift smoothly into a deep, restorative sleep, safe in the knowledge that the world outside can wait until the morning sun rises once more. In the narrow, twisting lanes that lay just beyond the shadow of the cathedral walls, the small workshops of the London herbalists and apothecaries existed as quiet sanctuaries of botanical knowledge and domestic preparation. During the damp spring afternoons, when a soft mist rolled in from the river and settled over the timber-framed buildings, these shops became centres of a unique and specialised industry. Inside, the air was perpetually cool and heavy with the grounding aromas of dried hyssop, crushed chamomile, and aged willow bark stored in deep wooden drawers. A master apothecary would move with a slow, deliberate grace behind his worn oak counter, his hands calloused from years of working with naturesque elements. He would carefully select specific pieces of dried willow wood, choosing only the branches that had been harvested during the dry summer months, ensuring they would burn evenly and produce the finest, softest charcoal imaginable. The physical process of transforming these natural elements was an exercise in absolute patience and rhythmic precision. The apothecary would place the charred wood inside a heavy mortar carved from solid green granite, lifting a heavy stone pestle with a practiced, steady motion. The sound of the stone grinding against stone was a continuous, soothing murmur filled the quiet shop, a steady white noise that seemed to slow the passage of time itself. With each slow rotation of the pestle, the hard charcoal was reduced to an incredibly fine, velvety black dust that caught the faint light filtering through the small, paned window-toes. The artisan would occasionally pause to sift the powder through a piece of fine silk cloth, ensuring that not a single coarse grind remained to irritate the delicate gums of his wealthy clients. To touch this refined powder was to feel a substance as light as air, yet capable of completely altering a person's social identity with a single application. To give this dry black dust the proper consistency for adherence, the apothecary would introduce a few measured drops of thick, golden clover honey or a small amount of fragrant almond oil into the mortar. Using a flat-boned spatula, he would blend the ingredients together. Verkep ite long, sweeping strokes, watching into a rich, glossy paste that held its shape perfectly. This deliberate combination of sweetness and darkness was a physical manifestation of the paradox that had captured the entire realm. Wealthy merchants and minor gentry who could not afford to consume massive quantities of imported sugar loaves would come to these shops in the quiet hours of the evening, handing over their silver coins in exchange for a small pewter tin filled with this synthetic decay. They sought to purchase the appearance of a luxury they could not truly possess, participating in a grand cultural illusion that valued the shadow of wealth far above the natural health of the body. Or may, as you listen to the steady, unhurried description of these ancient preparations, allow your mind to remain perfectly anchored in the deep comfort of your own modern sanctuary. The bustling markets, the aromatic apothecary shops, and the social ambitions of the 16th century have long since faded into the quiet landscape of the past, leaving behind only a peaceful memory of human behaviour. In your dark room, you are completely insulated from the need to conform or the pressure to perform for the world outside. The weight of your blanket is a steady, reassuring embrace, and your pillow offers a soft, supportive rest for your tired head. Let the soothing rhythm of the narrative wash over you, allowing your thoughts to gently dissolve into the warm, quiet darkness of the night as we watch the ancient city rest beneath a blanket of evening mist. The pursuit of this dark aesthetic led to a fascinating expansion of secret recipes tucked away within the heavy leather-bound household books of the English gentry. Beyond the standard willow charcoal prepared by the local apothecaries, aristocratic families began to experiment with their own unique botanical blends to achieve a more nuanced and enduring shade of black. In the quiet still rooms of these grand country houses, where the air was thick with the rich, comforting scent of drying marigolds, pressed clovers, and sweet marjoram, the head housekeeper would oversee the delicate process of burning specific herbs. Rosemary stalks, known for their fragrant oils, were tightly bound with hemp twine and placed into small iron boxes, which were then nestled deep within the dying embers of the hearth fire overnight. The following morning, when the iron was cool to the touch, the charred remains were carefully retrieved, having transformed into a delicate, aromatic soot that carried a faint, pleasing hint of evergreen resin beneath its dark appearance. When this specialized rosemary soot was blended with a few drops of concentrated elderberry juice or thick black molasses, it created a cosmetic paste that was remarkably dark and held its position on the enamel for an entire day. The physical application of this mixture within the quiet sanctuary of the dressing room was a slow, meditative affair that required absolute precision. A young noblewoman would sit perfectly still, her head tilted slightly backward against the high-carved wood of her chair, while her attendant used a small brush made from the finest badger hair to apply the dark paste. The sound within the room was limited to the gentle rustle of silk sleeves and the faint, rhythmic scratch of the soft bristles against the surface of the teeth. Each stroke was deliberate, ensuring that the black coloration was even and deep, completely masking any natural brightness with a rich, uniform shadow that would catch the ambient candlelight during the evening banquet. The physical sensation of wearing these herbal pastes was an ever-present reminder of the lengths to which human society would go to secure a sense of belonging and prestige. The charcoal and berry mixture left a dry, slightly astringent taste on the tongue, causing the individuals to move their mouths with a distinct, measured caution that only added to their air of aristocratic reserve. They would sip their warm spiced ales and sweetened wines through narrow openings, mindful not to disturb the carefully sculpted darkness that defined their current social standing. To the people of the 16th century, this sensory discomfort was a small price to pay for the immense psychological security it provided. A person walking through the grand galleries could instantly gauge the wealth and influence of an acquaintance simply by observing the specific shade of their smile, turning the mouth into a dynamic canvas of economic achievement. where the natural wholeness of the body was entirely subordinated to the heavy dictates of royal fashion. As you contemplate the slow, deliberate patterns of these ancient rituals, let the quiet weight of the past release its hold on the present own mind to Rexius. To the present, the elaborate recipes, the competitive displays of wealth, and the curious transformations of the Tudor court have long since dissolved into the calm, unchanging landscape of history. In the safety of your dark room, there are no standards you must meet and no roles you need to perform for the world outside. Your body is supported completely by the softness of your mattress, and your blanket offers a warm, protective envelope that shields you from the noise of the waking day. Let the steady, soothing rhythm of the narrative wash over you like a gentle wave, carrying away any lingering thoughts and allowing you to sink deeper into the quiet, restful spaces of a profound and undisturbed sleep. As this remarkable aesthetic preference consolidated its hold over the urban centres, it created a profound and visible chasm between the fashionable elite of London and the rustic population that inhabited the sweeping green hills of the English countryside, in the quiet, sun-drenched valleys far removed from the political intrigue of the court, the rhythms of daily life moved according to the timeless patterns of the seasons rather than the fleeting whims of royal fashion. Here, the agrarian labourers, the milkmaids and the shepherds lived a life grounded in simplicity and heavy physical toil. Their mornings began when the first pale light of dawn broke over the dewy hedgerows, and their daily sustenance was drawn entirely from the fertile soil beneath their feet. Because the astronomical cost of refined sugar loaves rendered the luxury entirely unattainable for these rural communities, their diet remained completely untouched by the sweet crystalline obsession that was quietly reshaping the tree appearance of the wealthy. The physical reality of this common lifestyle had an unintended and deeply ironic consequence for the health of the working class. The staple of the labourer-ess diet was coarse, heavy bread made from stone-ground rye and barley, a dense and split loaf that required a significant amount of physical effort to chew. In the quiet shade of an oak tree during the midday rest, a farmhand would break off a piece of this dark bread, the texture rough and substantial, against his hands. As he ate, the gritty fibres of the unrefined grain acted as a natural abrasive, gently scrubbing the surfaces of his teeth vein, kepi te hat every single bite. Combined with a daily intake of fresh spring water, wild herbs and seasonal vegetables, this simple regime of the natural strength and immaculate, pale ivory of their smiles. Not without a single thought of dentistry or cosmetics, the ordinary people of the fields possessed teeth and completely free from the silent, final acid-driven erosion that plagued the royal palace. However, when these country folk travelled along the dusty lanes into the capital to sell their woven wool, fresh cheeses, and harvested grains in the bustling markets, their natural health became a source of quiet misfortune. As a young woman from the dairy farms stood behind her wooden stall, the morning mist rising slowly from the cobblestones, she would offer a warm, genuine greeting to the passing townspeople, her lips parting to reveal a smile of flawless, vibrant white. To the eyes of the wealthy merchants and fashionable citizens who moved through the market stalls, this display of natural brightness was met not with admiration, but with an immediate cold sense of social pity. To possess a white smile in the 16th century was to wear a public proclamation of absolute poverty, a visual proof that one's household was too poor to afford even a single grain of the precious white gold that defined the tables of the high nobility. The healthy ivory was viewed as a vulgar marker of the lower orders, an undeniable sign of a life spent consuming primitive country foods far removed from the sophisticated, sugar-laden culture of the court. This profound inversion of beauty standards meant that the very characteristics which modern eyes would recognise as signs of health were interpreted by the Tudor. Elite as symbols of dynamic failure and social exclusion. The common people found themselves living in a world where their natural vitality was a mark of shame, while the painful rhythmic throbbing of dental decay was celebrated as an enviable luxury. Or, as you listen to the steady, unhurried unfolding of this historical paradox, allow your own body to find a sense of perfect, unburdened comfort in the present moment. The social pressures, the judgments, and the strange illusions of the old world have long since dissolved into the quiet dust of time, leaving only a peaceful space where you are entirely free from the need to conform or to be evaluated. Let the soft weight of your blanket anchor you in the safety of your dark room, knowing that the natural rest of your mind and body is the only true priority as the silent hours of the night continue to deepen around you. The contrast between the rural landscape and the dense, bustling reality of London created a fascinating space where the elite could perform their wealth with total devotion. Inside the timber-framed homes of the city, the evening hours brought a deep stillness that allowed families to contemplate their position within this grand social hierarchy. A wealthy merchant, having returned from a day of overseeing the unloading of precious spices at the docks, would sit by his stone hearth, the dry oak logs, watching the orange flames lick the dry oak logs. The scent of sweet wood smoke filled the room, blending with the subtle aroma of the tallow candles that illuminated the dark wooden panels of the parlour. In this quiet environment, the family would prepare for the small private gatherings that filled the social calendar of the urban middle class, where every detail of their appearance was carefully calibrated to reflect the sophisticated trends of the royal court. As the merchantess daughter sat before her bronze mirror, her thoughts were entirely fixed on the image she would project to the world when the guests arrived. Moster comes morbid, she would look at her reflection with a sense of quiet focus, holding a small silver container that held the fine charcoal paste her servants had prepared earlier in the afternoon, because the texture of the container was cool and smooth against her fingertips, a heavy piece of craftsmanship that felt substantial and secure in her hand. Using a delicate piece of silk cloth, she would gently pat the dark mixture across her teeth, watching as the natural brightness of her smile vanished into a deep uniform shadow. There was a remarkable sense of psychological comfort in this act, a feeling of deep alignment with the tastes of the sovereign that provided a shield against the uncertainties of life beyond the city walls. By choosing to wear the visual signature of royal luxury, she was claiming her place within a grand narrative of wealth and refinement, turning a simple domestic routine into a profound statement of social belonging. The quiet rhythm of these evening preparations created a peaceful atmosphere within the home, where the passage of time seemed to slow down to a gentle crawl. The soft rustle of heavy woolen skirts and the faint clatter of pewter plates being arranged on the long dining table provided a soothing background melody to the family's quiet conversations. They spoke in low, measured tones, their voices carrying a flat, serene cadence that reflected the formal nature of their surroundings. In this world of slow, deliberate movements, the artificial darkness of their smiles became a comforting constant, a shared visual language that bound the household together. In a state of absolute security and mutual understanding, they had fully embraced a philosophy that valued the illusion of wealth far above the natural health of the body, creating a unique aesthetic universe where the quiet shadow of decay was celebrated as the ultimate expression of human sophistication and worldly success. This profound inversion of aesthetic value reached its absolute zenith during the late years of the 16th century, anchoring itself deeply within the collective psychology of the Tudor generation. Within the warm wood-panelled parlours of London, a healthy white smile had officially become an emblem of social failure, a silent but devastating public announcement that an individual belonged to the forgotten underclass. Because to walk through the world with teeth that were naturally pale and unblemished was to be marked as someone who sustained themselves on the most basic elements of survival, far removed from potfind, from the sweet, global luxuries that defined the inner circle of royal favour. For a young woman of the aspiring merchant class, looking at her own bright, unmarred teeth in the quiet stillness of her bedchamber, brought not a sense of pride, but a heavy, lingering wave of social anxiety. She would look out her narrow window into the damp, evening air, watching the rain fall softly against the cobblestones, wishing for the dark markings that would grant her acceptance in the eyes of her peers. The psychological weight of this paradox created a strange, quiet atmosphere of shame around natural health. Individuals who were physically unable to purchase refined sugar, or who lacked the time to prepare the specialized charcoal pastes, would actively alter their behavior in public spaces. 2. To conceal their healthy smiles. During the lively morning markets or the formal gatherings at the local guild halls, these people would speak through tightly closed lips, carefully monitoring every single word to ensure their teeth remained completely hidden from view. A sudden laugh or an unmonitored expression of joy was quickly stifled with a heavy linen handkerchief or a raised hand, transforming ordinary human interaction into a guarded, highly calculated performance. The natural vitality of the human body had been completely reinterpreted as a flaw, a coarse and unrefined characteristic that needed to be masked or altered, obsessed with the illusion of royal wealth. The domestic environments of the working class further highlighted this divide, creating a visual and sensory world that was entirely separate from the opulent halls of the palace. In the small thatched cottages that sat on the outskirts of the city, families gathered around simple wood fires that burned with a crisp earthy aroma of oak twigs and dried peat. Their evening meals consisted of large wooden bowls filled with hete, a dense stone-ground pottage made of oats, wild leeks and field peas, accompanied by hard crusts of dark barley bread. The physical act of chewing this unrefined, fibre-rich food naturally cleansed their teeth, keeping their enamel strong and remarkably bright. Yet, as they sat in the dim light of their humble hearths, the sound of the wind rustling through the nearby trees, they were entirely unaware that the very cleanliness of their mouths separated them from the fashionable elite, marking them as part of a world that the high nobility viewed with a mixture of pity and disdain. But as you listen to the steady, unhurried progression of this history, let the deep stillness of your own room settle completely around you. The rigid expectations, the social judgments, and the bizarre standards of the old world have long since turned to dust, leaving behind only a calm, peaceful space where your mind can finally rest without pressure. In the quiet darkness of your sanctuary, there are no roles you need to play, no appearances you must maintain, and no eyes evaluating your worth. Your body is perfectly supported by the soft weight of your mattress, and your blanket provides a warm, protective cocoon against the cold uncertainties of the outside world. Allow your thoughts to dissolve into the steady, rhythmic cadence of the past, letting the soft memories of a slow-moving century carry you deeper into the quiet restorative embrace of a profound and peaceful sleep, secure in the knowledge that you are safe, comfortable, and completely free to let go of the day. As the damp chill of spring finally yielded to the heavy golden warmth of a midsummer afternoon, the atmosphere within the grand galleries of Hampton Court Palace shifted into a state of languid, stifling luxury. The thick stone walls, which had protected the courtiers from the biting winter winds, now trapped the humid air of the still sanctuary, turning the vast rooms into a warm, still sanctuary. Inside the presence chamber, the sun beamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced lazily above the velvet-covered benches. To cope with the oppressive heat, the ladies of the court moved their painted consistency, creating a soft collective whisper of air that filled the quiet space. Yet, despite the change in season, there was no relaxation standards of courtly fashion. The heavy jewel-encrusted gowns and stiff linen-kit, as ever, remained as immaculate as ever, and the devotion to the darkened smile only intensified in the brilliant summer light. This seasonal heat brought a new set of challenges for those who relied on the artificial charcoal pastes to maintain their social standing. In the warm, close air of the crowded reception halls, the sweat of the skin and the natural moisture of the mouth threatened to dissolve the carefully applied mixtures of graphite and willow soot. A young nobleman, standing in the shadow of a grand portrait, would feel the slight cool sensation of his cosmetic paste beginning to soften under the warmth of his breath. To prevent the dark pigment from smudging onto his pristine white ruff, he would adjust his posture with an absolute practice discipline, tilting his chin upward and speaking only in short, heavily modulated phrases. Every movement became a testament to human endurance, an elaborate performance where the physical discomfort of the climate was entirely mastered ends. To preserve a visual illusion of immense, sugar-rich wealth. The royal banquets during these summer months adapted to the weather by introducing magnificent towering sculptures made entirely of cast sugar, known as subtleties. These elaborate creations, shaped by the royal confectioners to ancient castles and flowering trees, were placed along the centre of the long trails, lecinalis florentibel, where they slowly glistened and softened in the warm afternoon air. The faint, heavy scent of melting sugar filled the banquet hall, blending with the rich aroma of roasted meats and sweet, spiced wines chilled in deep stone cellars. The courtiers would break off tiny fragments of these sugary structures, letting the crystal-sweet amber and charcoal tones of their tongues, reinforcing the deep charcoal tones of their teeth. It was a world entirely insulated from the natural rhythms of the earth, a society that chose to spend its brightest days celebrating an aesthetic born of decay and exclusive privilege. As you listen to the steady, peaceful progression of this summer chronicle, let the quiet warmth of the narrative of this summer evening bring a sense of absolute comfort to your own evening. The stifling courts, the melting sugar sculptures, and the rigid social expectations of the Tudor elite have long since faded into the quiet shadows of the past, leaving behind only a calm, unchanging memory. In the safety of your dark room, you are entirely free from the need to perform or to maintain an appearance for the world outside. The weight of your blanket is a steady, reassuring embrace, and your pillow offers a soft, restorative sanctuary for your mind. Allow your thoughts to dissolve into the rhythmic cadence of the history, letting the gentle passage of time carry you deeper into quite undisturbed spaces of a profound and peaceful sleep. As the golden light of midsummer began to wane, yielding to the crisp, cool air of early autumn, a quiet melancholy seemed to settle over the grand stone galleries of Whitehall. The transition of seasons was marked by the changing colours of the trees along the River Thames, their leaves turning from a vibrant green to deep shades of amber and copper, echoing the very palette that had come to dominate the smiles of the Tudor court. Inside the long galleries, the flickering torchlight cast long, dancing shadows against the heavy oak panelling, creating an intimate atmosphere where the elite gathered to pass the longer evening hours. The frantic energy of the summer diplomacy had slowed to a steady, meditative hum, and the conversations among the nobility took on a deep, more reflective tone as they huddled close to the newly swept hearths. For Queen Elizabeth, the arrival of autumn brought both a sense of seasonal peace and a continuation of the physical burdens she bore with such absolute dignity. Not in the quiet privacy of her dressing room, while the wind whistled softly through the stone battlements outside, her attendants would prepare her for the evening assemblies with an unhurried reverence. The daily application of her elaborate white makeup and the careful adjustment of her towering purple encrusted ruffs were performed in near silence, a familiar ritual that grounded the room in a state of tranquil focus. When the Queen offered a rare private smile to her closest ladies, the advanced decay of her teeth was visible in the dim candlelight, a striking mosaic of ebony and deep charcoal. Not to striding, yet to those who stood within this inner sanctuary, this physical fragility was not seen as a weakness, but as the ultimate testament to her sovereign endurance, a dark crown worn in secret that mirrored her absolute mastery over her court and her realm. This profound acceptance of decay as the highest standard of beauty continued to shape the lives of the younger generation of courtiers who sought her favour. In the quiet hours before dawn, young lords and ladies would sit before their silver mirrors to meticulously touching up their artificial charcoal coatings to ensure their teeth bore the prestigious, smoky shades of royal luxury. They had completely forgotten the natural brightness of health, having replaced it with a sophisticated artifice that demanded constant patience and self-control. As the night deepened over the sleeping city of London, the Palace of Whitehall remained wrapped in a warm, protective shroud of history, a silent monument to an era that had successfully turned the natural order upside down, celebrating the fragile of ruins of luxury as the highest expression of human elegance. As the sharp, frosty breath of late autumn tightened its grip on the city, the great river mist began to freeze into white lace along the wooden pilings of the London docks. The seasonal shift brought an intimate, cloistered warmth to the private chambers of the nobility, where heavy wool and velvet tapestries were pinned tightly against the stone walls to repel the creeping draughts. In these deeply insulated spaces, the soft rhythmic crackle of seasoned oak logs burning in the wide hearths became the heartbeat of the home, casting a restless, amber glow over the families. Gathered around the heat, the fading of the year did not diminish the courtly devotion to the darkened smile. Instead, the long winter evenings provided this slow, silent performance of wealth. More me. Under the dim illumination of beeswax candles, the preparation of the sweetmeats for the evening card games took on a deeply soothing, repetitive cadence. Attendants would carefully arrange silver platters of hard gingerbread, sugar-crusted almonds, and deep red quince paste that had been boiled down with refined white sugar until it glistened like raw rubies. The noble guests would reach for these delicacies with small, deliberate movements, their fingers catching the warm firelight as they lifted the sweet morsels to their lips. Each slow bite allowed the intense, concentrated sweetness to blanket their mouths, a deliberate indulgence that reinforced the deep, smoky shades of charcoal and ebony they wore with such profound satisfaction. In this winter sanctuary the natural world oust, with its cold, harsh realities, was completely forgotten, replaced by a highly stylized world where luxury was measured by the gentle breakdown of the body. The quiet conversations that drifted across the card tables moved at an unhurried, serene pace, mirroring the heavy stillness of the freezing night. Courtiers spoke in low, modulated tones, their breaths forming small, faint plumes of mist in the corners of the room furthest from the fire. When a hand was won or a clever jest shared, the subtle parting of the lips revealed the dark architecture of their teeth, met with quiet, affirmative nods from companions who understood the immense financial sacrifice behind the appearance. It was a moment of absolute social security, a shared understanding that bound the elite together against the darkness of the world outside. As the hour grew late and the fires burned down to a deep, pulsing crimson, the guests would slowly retire to their beds, wrapped in thick linen sheets and heavy down quilts, drifting into a calm and restorative sleep, while the frost continued to etch its silent patterns onto the windows of the sleeping city. The deepening winter freeze completely halted the shipping lanes along the frozen River Thames, effectively cutting London off from the incoming maritime trade routes that supplied the capital with foreign luxuries. This physical isolation intensified the domestic value of the remaining sugar supplies, transforming the sweet substance into a tightly controlled currency of political influence within the locked gates of Whitehall Palace. Rather than diminishing the display of wealth, the scarcity forced the senior ministers for the most critical diplomatic encounters, ensuring that every dark smile flashed during a state council carried an immense weight of economic defiance. The inability of foreign merchants to deliver fresh cargo only heightened the mystique of the luxury, rendering the organic decay of the teeth an even more exclusive marker of the highest aristocratic tier. During the traditional winter revels and the indoor theatrical performances hosted in the Great Hall, this aesthetic reached a state of heightened theatricality. The elite gathered under the heavy timber roof to watch the court masques, their pale faces illuminated by hundreds of flickering wax torches that cast a warm, dramatic glow over their elaborate velvet costumes. Playwrights and poets of the era actively incorporated smiles into their courtly verses. To these, celebrating the dark staining of the teeth as a visual metaphor for worldly sophistication and refined taste. A courtier who could display a perfectly dark smile while dissecting a complex piece of political allegory in the play was viewed with immense admiration, cementing the fashion as an intellectual and cultural ideal that transcended mere dietary habits. Outside the immediate circle of the royal presence, the wealthy merchant families of the city struggled to maintain their alignment with this winter aesthetic as their own private stores of genuine sugar rapidly depleted. To bridge the gap created by the shipping blockade, the domestic demand for the specialized willow soot and charcoal compounds prepared by urban apothecaries districts skyrocketed throughout the commercial districts, in the cold, drafty guild halls where the city masters met to discuss civic governance. The artificial application of these dark pastes became an absolute necessity for anyone seeking to protect their professional credibility. The visual uniformity of stained teeth across these municipal gatherings served as a collective shield, allowing the urban middle class to project an illusion of uninterrupted prosperity despite the economic stagnation gripping the freezing capital. This prolonged winter isolation ultimately hardened the cultural perception that the deliberate alteration of the human body was the ultimate work of a civilized society. not to evoke a poltergeist in some. The continuous validation exchanged through these darkened smiles created an insular psychological barrier that completely separated the urban elite from the natural, unadorned reality of the rural working class. Even as the freezing weather strained the city, basic resources and limited the availability of essential goods, the commitment to maintaining this expensive, manufactured illusion remained entirely unbroken. The Tudor ruling class had successfully codified a physical affliction into a permanent monument of social status, ensuring that the visual language of decay would remain the undisputed standard of beauty and power, regardless of the changing seasons. The gradual arrival of the spring hat of Kep slowly unlocked the frozen pathways of the River Thames, allowing the long-delayed merchant vessels to finally clear the dangerous ice-choked channels and arrive at the London wharves. This sudden resurgence of foreign trade flooded the capital with fresh, massive cones of refined sugar, instantly reigniting the court's competitive obsession with the elite aesthetic. The return of the precious crystalline luxury did not mark a return to natural standards of health. Instead, it provided the wealthy with the direct means to abandon their temporary winter charcoal substitutes in favour of the authentic, destructive inner circle that originally defined the royal Ilber circle. The bustling markets surrounding the docks immediately transformed into arenas of intense financial warfare, where noble households outbid one another to secure the purest white loaves from the newly docked ships. This seasonal transition also introduced a challenging physical environment within the open-air courtyards and manicured knot gardens of Hampton Court Palace, where the brilliant and unforgiving spring sunshine replaced the dim, forgiving torchlight of the winter chambers. Under this intense natural illumination, the artificial cosmetic pastes made from willow soot and graphite were subjected to a severe visual trial, as any uneven application or smudging became instantly visible to the sharp eyes of rival courtiers. The ladies and gentlemen of the household were forced to spend double the time before their dressing mirrors, carefully blending their herbal applications to ensure a flawless, uniform shadow that could withstand the bright, midday light without exposing any remaining natural brightness. The social pressure shifted from merely possessing a dark smile to maintaining it with flawless precision of a court under the watchful scrutiny of a court that scrutinized every facial movement for signs of fraudulent elite status. The economic impact of this fresh sugar influx created an even wider psychological chasm between the impoverished agrarian population, the surrounding shires. As the price of basic foodstuffs fluctuated with the changing season, the monetary value of refined sugar remained astronomically high, ensuring that its consumption remained a violent luxury, available only to those who held significant influence within the Commonwealth. Minor gentry who had exhausted their financial reserves during the winter lockdown rushed to purchase even the smallest fragments of sugar dust, desperate to prove that their status had survived the hardships of the cold months intact. The physical evidence of this consumption, written in the steady discoloration of the teeth, became an undeniable credit rating within the commercial districts, a visible guarantee of a family's financial resilience and social standing. Ultimately, the renewal of the spring season demonstrated that the Tudor commitment of beauty to this temporary madness was not a temporary madness, but a deeply institutionalized system of social classification. The shared visual language of advanced dental decay continued to dictate the boundaries of political inclusion, determining who was permitted to stand with the immediate shadow of the sovereign, and who was relegated to the periphery of power. Every formal gathering in the state apartments served to reinforce this cultural absolute, creating an environment where the natural order of human health was entirely forgotten in pursuit of an expensive, manufactured illusion. As the court prepared for the elaborate Easter pageants, the dark smile remained the undisputed emblem of high civilization, casting a domestic life of the 16th century over the domestic life of the 16th century. The arrival of the Grand Embassy from the kingdoms of France and Spain at the gates of Whitehall Palace to the diplomatic chambers of the English court, to the diplomatic Biblid court, these foreign dignitaries, accustomed to the pristine marble halls of Paris and Madrid, walked through the tapestried galleries with an intense curiosity, their eyes evaluating every detail of the Tudor monarchy's wealth. As they were presented to the high officials of the realm, the initial exchange of formal greetings brought an unexpected shock to the continental visitors. The sophisticated ambassadors, who valued physical perfection and immaculate health as the primary markers of noble lineage, themselves staring into mouths filled with deep, smoky shadows and advanced dental decay worn verkepite at absolute pride. This striking visual divergence created a profound wave of cultural misunderstanding that whispered through the secret dispatches sent back to the European capitals. In the eyes of the Spanish grandees, the dark smiles of the English nobility were initially misinterpreted as the symptoms of some hidden maritime plague or a unique northern affliction born from the damp river air. They could not immediately comprehend that this physical breakdown was a manufactured aesthetic, a deliberate destruction of the body meant to signal a daily indulgence in the world's most expensive luxury. To the foreign minds, a flawless white smile was an undeniable asset, making the blackened teeth of the English court appear as a bizarre inversion of natural law that defied the established continental standards of human beauty. Queen Elizabeth, fully aware of the psychological impact her court's unique appearance had on foreign visitors, masterfully transformed this aesthetic into a subtle weapon of international diplomacy. During the private audiences in the presence chamber, the sovereign would deliberately lote her head back and offer a wide, unmonitored laugh to the French ambassador, displaying the full ebony architecture of her teeth. This theatrical display was not a moment of vulnerability, but an aggressive demonstration of absolute economic supremacy, a silent declaration that England possessed such immense wealth that its ruling class could afford to waste fortunes on the ruinous luxury of refined sugar. The foreign emissaries found themselves intimidated by this quiet confidence, realizing that the smiles represented a kingdom entirely secure in its own inshallah. Ultimately, the encounters within the diplomatic chambers hardened the foreign perception of the English court as an enigmatic and fiercely independent world. The ambassadors returned to their ships with a deep, lingering sense of unease, unable to shake the image of an elite class that celebrated the visible ruins of luxury as the ultimate standard of sophistication. The shared visual language of the Tudor court had successfully protected its political borders, turning a physical malady into an undisputed monument of national identity that no foreign power could easily decode or influence. The normalization of the darkened smile found its most radical defenders among the younger generation of the Tudor aristocrats, who had been born into the peak of the sugar obsession. For these young lords and ladies, the natural brightness of healthy teeth was an alien concept that stood entirely outside their understanding of elegance. Having grown up watching the sovereign celebrate dental decay as the highest achievement of courtly life. They viewed a pristine smile with deep sopotal pity. The youthful members of the household did not see their habits as a temporary fashion, but as a fundament them from the common world that separated them from the common. This generational shift led to competitive circles within the private apartments of Whitehall, where the young elite vied for the title of possessing the most perfectly blackened teeth. The traditional mixtures of willow soot were increasingly viewed by these youths as insufficient, prompting them to seek a far more aggressive compounds to the staining process. Accelerates. They experimented with concentrated extracts of green walnut hulls, rubbing the caustic juices directly onto their enamel during private gatherings. To achieve a deeper shade of charcoal was to secure instant admiration, turning their dressing rooms into arenas of cosmetic experimentation. The physical toll of these extreme methods was borne with a disturbing level of pride, as the constant aching of their mouths was celebrated as an honourable wound received in the service of fashion. A young maiden, who could scarcely speak due to the tenderness of her eroding teeth, was envied by her companions, who interpreted her silence as supreme devotion to the court. Their interactions became highly stylized, with groups of young nobles communicating through measured gestures and half-parted lips that revealed the costly ruins within. The natural vitality of youth was willingly sacrificed for social conformity. Ultimately, this youthful fanaticism ensured that the bizarre aesthetic would remain firmly anchored in the collective psychology of the realm. The older ministers observed these radical displays with quiet satisfaction. Recognizers of the Commonwealth were fully committed to the traditions of the Crown. The shared visual language of decay had successfully skipped a generation, cementing its position not as a passing whim, but as an enduring monument of national identity that defied the natural order of human health. The imitation of this elite fashion eventually spilled over the city walls, infecting the rural market towns surrounding the capital. Country folk travelling into London to sell their produce could no longer ignore the heavy social stigma associated with their naturally white teeth. To display a bright, healthy smile was to be branded as a primitive outsider, a vulgar labourer untouched by wealth. This intense pressure created a desperate desire among the rustic population to replicate the prestigious decay of the nobility, despite lacking the money to buy real sugar. Unable to afford the rare white crystals or the fine charcoal prepared by city apothecaries, the rural poor turned to dangerous, destructive alternatives. In small village cottages, young people experimented with harsh local substances to artificially erode their teeth. They rubbed their enamel with the highly acidic juices of wild berries, strong vinegars, and even corrosive mineral mixtures gathered from local workshops. These crude methods did not produce the rich ebony tones of the court, but instead caused severe chemical burns and painful destruction of their healthy teeth. The physical consequences were devastating for the agrarian workforce, yet the suffering was borne with a tragic sense of pride. The natural strength that allowed a labourer to chew coarse grain was willingly sacrificed to escape the pity of the urban elite. Young farmhands walked through the lanes with their mouths throbbing from infection, viewing their self-inflicted wounds as a ticket to acceptance. When they returned to the city, they displayed their damaged teeth, unaware that the wealthy could easily spot the cheap nature of the imitation fame. This widespread emulation demonstrated how deeply the royal court had distorted the basic instincts of human survival across the Commonwealth. The natural vitality of the working class was completely dismantled by the invisible power of fashion, turning a healthy population into a tragic reflection of a rotting elite. Because the visual language of status had expanded to dominate the entire kingdom, proving that the desire to belong was powerful enough to make people destroy the very health that sustained them. And Stovemore, the absolute dominance of this aesthetic created a severe crisis for the royal physicians who resided within the palace walls. These practitioners were tasked with alleviating the agonizing physical pain suffered by the and her ministers, while ensuring the prestigious black coloration of their teeth remained entirely undisturbed. To offer a remedy that accidentally cleansed the enamel, or lightened the shade, was viewed as a severe offence against royal dignity. Consequently, the palace still rooms were filled with the heavy scents of medicinal herbs being boiled down with the very sugar syrups that caused the destruction, creating a strange loop where the cure and the cause were inextricably linked. The secret recipes developed by the doctors relied heavily on imported oils like clove and myrrh, which were celebrated for their ability to numb the deep ache of exposed nerves. These potent liquids were carefully blended with fine willow charcoal to create a medicinal paste. Packed directly into the hollow cavities of the teeth, courtiers would endure painful procedures where hot needles were used to cauterize the interior of a decayed tooth. Yet they insisted the outward appearance remain as dark as possible. This immense physical tolerance became a private point of honor among the nobility, who viewed their medical suffering as an elite burden that ordinary citizens could never understand. In the commercial districts, urban apothecaries quickly capitalized on this misery by manufacturing cheap imitations of the royal numbing pastes. Shopfronts displayed small ceramic jars containing mixtures of alum, pepper and soot, promising temporary comfort to the wealthy merchants whose teeth were rapidly eroding. The trade in these pain-relieving compounds became highly profitable, intertwining economic growth with bodily destruction as citizens spent fortunes to maintain the illusion of aristocratic decay. The urban public willingly embraced these harsh remedies, desperate to suppress the constant throbbing that defined their daily lives. This widespread commercialization institutionalized the belief that physical suffering was an inescapable companion to high status. The Tudor elite constructed a reality where a body free from pain was viewed with suspicion, as it indicated a life devoid that defined the ruling class. The continuous reliance on these medicated charcoal pastes ensured that the dark smile remained a permanent monument to a civilization that prioritized the theatre of wealth over the basic principles of human survival. The passing of the aged queen in the early hours of a spring morning signaled the immediate collapse of the elaborate visual world she had spent decades constructing. As her mortal remains were carried to Westminster Abbey, the symbolic power of her physical decay was buried along with her, leaving the court in a sudden state of profound transition. The silent, dark crown of endurance she had worn on her teeth was no longer the guiding light of royal favour, and the crowded galleries of Whitehall instantly felt hollow, stripped of the sovereign presence that had normalised the bizarre standard of beauty for an entire generation. The arrival of the new monarch from the north brought an abrupt and total shift in the aesthetic values of the ruling class. King James and his foreign queen brought with them a courtly culture that favoured natural freshness, clean lines, and an open, unblemished appearance that directly rejected the heavy artifices of the late Tudor era. Within weeks of the coronation, the continuous consumption of sugar as the new inner circle viewed the stain of immense wealth, not as a mark of immense wealth, but as a grotesque relic of an outdated and unhealthy regime. A desperate panic swept through the old aristocracy as courtiers, who had spent their entire youth deliberately destroying their teeth, now rushed to reverse the damage. Apothecaries who had grown rich selling willow soot and graphite compounds instantly pivoted their businesses, manufacturing harsh, whitening powders, soot made from crushed coral, bone ash, and strong acids to scrub away the stubborn black stains. The social meaning of the dark smile completely inverted once more. To display a blackened tooth was now to be branded as an obsolete courtier, clinging to a dead past, an embarrassing reminder of a bygone madness. Ultimately, the unique fashion faded into the quiet margins of history, to remembered only as a strange of power to how basic laws of human power could distort the basic laws of human survival. The kingdom moved forward into a new century, quickly forgetting the era when physical ruin was celebrated as a healthy smile, was feared as a sign of social failure. Healthy so. The visual language of the late 16th century dissolved like the sugar that had fueled it, leaving behind only the dusty records of a civilization that for a brief and intense doat moments chose to worship decay as the highest form of elegance. Centuries after the last Tudor sovereign was laid to rest, the physical legacy of this unique cultural obsession re-emerged from the quiet earth beneath the modern metropolis. During archaeological excavations of old Shehat-u autocratic burial grounds, researchers began to unearth the skeletal remains of the 16th century elite. When scientists examined the skulls of these high-born individuals, they were immediately struck by the severe, uniform destruction of the dental structures, which stood in sharp contrast to the well-preserved bones of the lower classes. The heavy chemical analysis of the enamel confirmed a massive lifelong indulgence in highly refined sugar, providing tangible, physical proof of the historical accounts that had long been treated as mere courtly exaggeration. These modern discoveries offered fascinating, tangible window into the psychological reality of a society that had completely inverted the natural laws of health for social status. In the sterile environment of the contemporary laboratories, the damaged teeth were no longer viewed as symbols of supreme elegance or royal favour, but as tragic evidence of a profound cultural delusion. The very markings that had once granted access to the inner circles of power were now classified as pathological specimens, illustrating how easily human behaviour can be manipulated by the invisible forces of fashion and peer conformity. The dark smiles that had once intimidated foreign ambassadors and commanded absolute respect across crowded palace halls had ultimately become silent, scientific monuments to the heavy price of vanity. Inside the brightly lit galleries of the national museums, these skeletal artifacts were eventually placed on permanent public display, drawing thousands of curious visitors from around the globe, encased in pristine glass boxes, sat alongside the surviving remnants of their material wealth, including embroidered velvet doublets and heavy gold signet rings. The stark juxtaposition between the exquisite craftsmanship of their clothing and the violent visual experience for those who walked through the exhibitions. Visitors stood in hushed silence, staring at the physical wreckage left behind by a court that had once dictated the political destiny of a continent through the sheer power of an expensive illusion. The modern fascination vers capitaire hat. These displays frequently triggered a deeper, more unsettling reflection on the nature of contemporary human vanity within the minds of the public. While onlookers initially laughed at the apparent absurdity of the 16th, the uncomfortable parallels, many began to recognize their own modern cultures. Existing within their own modern cultures, the immense financial and physical sacrifices made today for artificial cosmetic enhancements, aggressive teeth whitening procedures, and extreme body modifications stem from the exact same psychological desire to signal elite status and group belonging. The realization that human nature has remained entirely unchanged over the span of 4 centuries turned the historical exhibit into a psychological mirror, forcing people to confront the lengths to which they still go to satisfy the unspoken rules of modern fashion. Within academic circles, the tragic phenomenon of the darkened smile became a foundation, and sociologists analyzing the origins of consumer culture. Scholars utilized the detailed court records and dental specimens to demonstrate override the biological instincts of self-preservation and health. Socioeconomic signaling, the deliberate destruction of the enamel, was re-examined not as a random act of ignorance, but as a highly sophisticated system of non-verbal communication that established an undeniable credit rating within a rapidly changing economic landscape. This academic reassessment elevated the Tudor obsession to a profound warning about the power of artificial luxury to dictate human and societal values to dictate ubium behaviors. Ultimately, the enduring legacy of the blackened smile serves as a permanent reminder of the fragile manufactured nature of all human standards of beauty. Every great civilization inevitably constructs its own unique illusions of sophistication, which future generation with a mixture of disbelief and pity. The ruins of the Tudor elite remain frozen in time, offering an eternal lesson on the heavy price of social conformity and the terrifying the human body in its own image. Key to reshape the human body in the continuous preservation of these artifacts ensures the core that the visual language of the 16th century court remains an active part of the human story, proving that the pursuit of status can make a civilization worship decay as the absolute highest form of perfection. The grand tapestry of the Tudor era ne ove kep rests entirely in the silent care of history, its elaborate social rituals and competitive vanities reduced to dust and memory. The black smile, which once represented the absolute height of earthly power and financial immunity, stands as a profound testament to the lengths toward which humanity will go to secure a fragile illusion of status. As the centuries continue to march forward, the story of this unique obsession serves as an enduring reminder that beauty is forever bound to the changing whims of civilization. The voices of the past have finally fallen quiet, leaving behind a timeless lesson on the eternal price of conformity and the eternal theatre of human desire.